Miles was a diligent and hardworking man who had earned everything he possessed. His family was very important to him, especially his wife, children, and grandchildren. Now that he was retired, he could simply enjoy life without any obligations. He enjoyed sitting on his porch in his retirement home and taking in the landscape. Unfortunately, he became progressively irritated every time he looked at his neighbor's backyard.
Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.
As he gazed into his neighbor's yard, Miles realized how small his land was in comparison to his neighbor's. At first, he assumed his neighbor was just lucky, but then he realized what was going on. Miles was well-liked by everyone in the area and knew everyone. He even got along with his next-door neighbor, who had a larger yard. When he saw his neighbor's beautiful new bright red sports automobile, a part of him felt jealous, while another half was in awe. Miles spotted his next-door neighbor doing something unusual one afternoon, walking back and forth over his huge yard. Miles became aware of his disappearance. However, when he returned, he had a wheelbarrow full of high-priced pays. Miles became outraged when he saw what he did next after he laid them out. From his front entrance to his back door, the neighbor began laying asphalt. In a few hours, he had paved the entire backyard. He wasn't quite done yet. When Miles did the next thing, his eyes widened. His neighbor began taking down the fence posts one by one. That was just the start. He shoved them 2 feet back and started hammering them into the ground. Miles couldn't believe his eyes when he saw what he did. He eventually figured out why he had such a huge behind. Miles was not about to let him get away with it. After he completed it, he began cleaning the area for the rest of his pavers. Then Miles entered the scene and stopped him dead in his tracks. Miles had previously worked for the National Park Service and reasoned that if he persisted, his next-door neighbor might not be aware of what would happen. Miles gently approached his neighbor, but he didn't have time to say anything before his neighbor barged in. He started to scream, "You're new here." "I've been here 10 years, he spat. "Mind your own damn business." Miles walked away calmly, pondering how to handle the situation. As Miles watched his neighbor grow older, he was angry on the inside. He wasn't sure how long he'd been doing it for, but he guessed years. A few moments later, he recognized what he needed to do. He didn't have to do anything. All he had to do was wait and see what happened. For a year, Miles kept track of it. When summer arrived, things calmed down. The majority of the villagers, including his neighbor, went to the north for their vacations. He had no intention of demanding vengeance and believed that karma would take care of itself. On an exciting morning for kilometers, the county arrived at the reserve. When they saw Miles' neighbor's yard, they were not amused. They started pacing back and forth, grabbing their maps, cameras, and phones. More people eventually arrived. Miles' neighbor has been doing this for years. He was always snatching up territory and paving it for his personal benefit. The county knew they needed to take action or he wouldn't stop, so they left a note on his door. The notice piqued Miles' interest, and he approached the door after they had departed. It read that his neighbor was in violation of encroachment onto protected lands and that he has 30 days to move his car, tear up the pavers, and pay a fine of $11,000. The notice piqued Miles' interest, and he approached the door after they had departed. It read that his neighbor was in making a decision. If his neighbor did not comply within 30 days, they threatened to take away his golf cart and sports car. They would also have to dig up the pavers, which he would have to pay for. His neighbor would be charged extra for each day that passed after the deadline. Wow, this was amazing. After a month on vacation, he had not returned. As the deadline arrived, he had broken the regulations. As the automobile and golf cart was taken away, Miles waited on his porch, observing. Then his yard was completely demolished. Miles stood there, watching it all play out exactly as he had predicted. The fences were replaced with new ones, and the pavers were taken out of the ground and removed. Because the steel cables were grounded in cement, he couldn't remove them this time. This went on for 2 weeks, during which time his neighbor did not return. The contractors were almost through with their job when I arrived. A camera was also mounted to keep an eye on the creatures from afar. More notices piled up on his next-door neighbor's door every week. While Miles was comfortable, he was also concerned as he awaited the return of his neighbor. By November, the neighbor had returned home after a long absence. As the neighbor pulled up to his house, Miles gladly watched from his porch. He hurried to his garden in rage after discovering the stacks upon stacks of notices. The next-door neighbor dashed back to his car and grabbed his cell phone. He'd immediately contacted the county to inquire about his sports car and golf cart. With just one look at him, you could tell he was enraged. Miles, on the other hand, seemed content as he smiled to himself. Miles' neighbor knocked on his door 3 days later, questioning if he was present when the incident occurred. Miles was straightforward with him. Everything was under his watchful observation. His next-door neighbor became irate, wanting to know why he hadn't even called him. While Miles pondered calling him, he concluded that it would be best if he just went about his business. When luck isn't on our side, we may find ourselves living next door to the most annoying neighbors. It's tough to know what the appropriate course of action is in cases like this. You can try to communicate with them in a mature and calm manner, but what if they refuse to listen to you and are stubborn? The issues between two neighbors can sometimes grow so severe that living with them is painful and distressing. Finding a happy medium where all sides are satisfied would be ideal, but that isn't always possible. It's difficult to deal with situations like these, especially when the other party refuses to collaborate and doesn't care about your sentiments. Some folks would sooner relocate than deal with their obnoxious neighbors. Some people try to contact authorities, although this does not always work. Then there are those, like this man, who dares to stay and fight for their beliefs. He made the decision not to give up and to take command of the situation.